we operate over 330 data centers across the globe, and what that requires is that our operational teams need platforms and systems that can manage and monitor the environmentals within those data centers. And the world is a big place, and being able to do that in a centralized fashion, provide efficient and productive ways of managing those environments is critical for us. We are an enterprise business at the end of the day. We're no different to the customers that we're actually supporting. So for us, it was really about three key things. So it was around scalability, operational efficiency, and security and compliance. And these platforms that monitor and manage our environments not only do like the environmentals, as I mentioned, so humidity, water flow, cooling, all of those factors that are inside the suites that host the infrastructure.
The infrastructure complexity have been there forever. It's just that the intensity of this complexity is getting higher because there is more outcome and more workload who are residing on that infrastructure.
If you have 99 packets being delivered under 10 milliseconds, but one packet is actually 200 milliseconds, that can have a cascading effect on your model and your GPU usage.
On a seemingly normal morning in early 2026, a mid-sized city in the US woke up to something no CIO ever wants to experience. Nothing worked. Emergency systems were unstable. Government services were offline. Staff were locked out. Citizens couldn't access basic services. What started as a routine day had turned into a full-scale digital crisis within hours. This wasn't a theoretical risk. It was a ransomware attack that forced the city to shut down most of its IT systems to contain the damage. And this wasn't an isolated incident. Just weeks earlier, a global telecom outage disrupted connectivity for thousands. Around the same time, multiple organizations, from fintech platforms to content providers, reported data breaches due to third-party vulnerabilities. And there are many more stories like these. So how should CIOs and IT leaders prepare and plan for modernization while balancing cost, complexity, cyber resilience, and AI readiness? To unpack this, I am joined by experts from Digital Realty and Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, two companies at the forefront of AI-ready data center innovations. Let's get started with quick introduction.
Hi, so I'm David Rainey, and I'm the Senior Director of APAC for Market and Business Development at Digital Realty. So our team leads the development of ecosystem development for things like CDNs, network providers, hyperscalers that make Digital Realty the best meeting place for your data.
I'm Christophe Maisonneuve. I'm actually leading the sales for hybrid cloud solution in Asia Pacific. I'm based in Singapore. I've been into this position for about a decade, but I've been in HP for 25 years. And as part of that journey, I was actually also leading the data center facility team in HPE.
And Simon Lurie, so I lead the solution architecture practice for APAC for Digital Realty. So, we're the ones that are working at the coalface with our customers to understand what their business objectives are and helping translate that into the technology solutions of not just what we do from a Digital Realty perspective, but how that ties into the connectivity and working with our partners like HPE on what are those infrastructure solutions to help them solve their real world problems and bring them to life.
Great. So if we get started with the conversation, as we know, most organizations have infrastructure which is not ready for AI. So maybe David, I'll start with you first. So from your perspective, what could be the potential starting point for these organizations?
When we speak to customers, what they're telling us is that their existing facilities are not ready for AI transformation. The facilities can't support the power and cooling requirements that are necessary, and those power and cooling requirements are only going to increase. We can see this coming, and this is an industry-wide view. According to the Uptime Institute, 85% of current facility operators are saying their facilities are not ready for the AI explosion that's coming. So we know the facilities have to change. The question is to what and how do you get started? So we always consider that AI has to start with data modernization. You have to consider the data model, the volumes, where's that data generated, how much does it cost to move, to transfer, What are the jurisdictions and regulatory impacts of that data? And how do you move that across the world? So for us, the natural starting point is interconnect. So compute can scale, facilities can be upgraded, but if your data's stranded, locked in the wrong location, or behind expensive transit or outside regulatory boundaries, then there's no amount of GPU capacity fixes will help that. If you get the data architecture right, the rest of the modernization roadmap follows.
Yeah, so when we look at it from an HP point of view, I think we have been stating quite frequently this hybrid by accident. And I think we are also having customers who are getting AI by accident. And as you mentioned into your story just at this beginning of the session, we can see that actually a lot of customers are realizing the threat that this kind of new environment is going to give on them. Of course, as David is saying, location is very important. We need to know where we are going to put things in place. But I think how we are going to operate this new environment is also very important. Mm-hmm. How we are going to interconnect this type of environment and system is also going to be important, because to find the right location is not only the core data center, is also going to be the core data center location compared to the edge data center where the actually usage is going to be, and maybe some of the cloud partner that anyway customer are going to have, because when you are hybrid, you also need to consider the connectivity not only to your edge, but also to your cloud service provider. Yeah, so for that, we have also a solution in HPE where we are trying to be hybrid by design, and that design starts from the data center all the way to the connectivity, operation management, and so on. Yeah.
So since you talked about one solution, maybe I'll go to Simon and go a little deeper and trying to understand what does, for customers who are going on this path, what does digital reality internal deployment actually mean?
Yeah, so from a HPE partnership perspective, it's not just about how we're helping our enterprise customers. We are a customer of HPE themselves, and we operate over 330 data centers across the globe, and what that requires is that our operational teams need platforms and systems that can manage and monitor the environmentals within those data centers. And the world is a big place, and being able to do that in a centralized fashion, provide efficient and productive ways of managing those environments is critical for us. We are an enterprise business at the end of the day. We're no different to the customers that we're actually supporting. So for us, it was really about three key things. So it was around scalability, operational efficiency, and security and compliance. And these platforms that monitor and manage our environments not only do like the environmentals, as I mentioned, so humidity, water flow, cooling, all of those factors that are inside the suites that host the infrastructure, but it's also the physical security. So the physical security for ourselves, but also the security that we're providing to our customers as well. So that's CCTV that's inside the racks. It's the biometrics of how that is being utilized as well. So what we were looking for in part of a solution was really about, one, we need to be able to have data sovereignty. So, we've got regulatory requirements that we need to meet in the various different geographies that our data centers are in, but also how that actually impacts our customers, because we have financial customers, we have government customers. So we need to be able to help support what their regulatory and compliance requirements are. And then, not all of our systems need to be in line with, having to build a single solution that every time you want to upgrade, you upgrade the compute and the storage at the same time. So being able to decouple, the compute from the storage and upgrade when and where required was one of the things that, when we were going through our selection process, PCBE was able to help us facilitate that. So, one of the key use cases was our CCTV footage, not very compute intensive, but very storage intensive, because we have to keep that footage, we have to keep it in location. So we were able to upgrade the storage, with low cost drives. That didn't mean that we had to upgrade the compute at the same time. The other component that, PCBE provided for us was that centralized orchestration and automation. And as I mentioned, we've got operational teams in all of our data centers around the globe, but being dependent on local teams that have got so much work that they've got to do on a daily basis anyway, being able to have that centralized management, being able to do patch management, upgrade, monitor those platforms and systems in a centralized fashion was critical for us. And so what does that mean from a customer perspective? It really comes down to the fact that we're our best use case for what we're doing and what we're prescribing to our customers when we're talking about how do you scale, what's the right location, what are the right platforms, how do you bring all of that together? We can actually put our hand on our heart and go, we've done it for ourselves. We can take you through what that process and that architecture looks like and really bring that to life for them.
Simon articulated about scale, location, and architectural considerations. Now, there is another aspect of infrastructure complexity. Why you think there is infrastructure complexity today?
The infrastructure complexity have been there forever. It's just that the intensity of this complexity is getting higher because there is more outcome and more workload who are residing on that infrastructure. And this is why into the use case that actually Simon was mentioning, the fact that there is an agility into the design is helping. And today what the customer want to have is to find a set of solutions who have that agility by design. The second thing that they want to have as a kind of solution, which is also addressing some of this complexity, is to have a single pane of glass. Because the complexity not only is happening into maybe the compute or is really the complete environment is getting more dense, more demanding from the business, because the business want to have more workload in production faster. They want to connect to more environment faster. So this capacity also of expanding is bringing an addition into the complexity the customer are having today, right? In the past, it was really a monolithic environment, which is giving a solution to a very specific group of people. Today, this is exploding. Yeah, we can see that actually the systems that they use are not only used by the operation that they have, is also a service that they give to their own customer. So the customer want to have a visibility that in the past this sharing is also bringing an additional set of complexity. The demand of transparency is also making the things more complex. If there is an event like what you mentioned at the beginning also of the discussion, you need to communicate easily. You need to have data. So again, in the past, only some subject matter experts were having the certain silo of data that they need for their business. This is again removed today. This set of information need to be accessible also to the end user, because they want to know why things are going wrong. They want to know why you cannot deploy tomorrow morning, right? So all this kind of element of demand are also bringing the environment as a more complex environment, right? And we need to provide tools and technology and people into our solution to basically address this element of complexity to are coming. But again, it's not just a silo complexity. It's becoming a kind of across the board complexity which is coming in front of us today. And this is what is changing really the market. It's not something new, it's just the density that we have and the frequency that we have to face, which is really transitioning into something which is now looking much more complex. So this is why it's important to have also tools with a lot of automation, a lot of interconnection between each of them, because we need to know what is the problem that they may have on the mechanical or electrical into their data center, who can actually impact the outcome of a customer which is trying to have a VM farm that they want to sell to another customer of them, right? For them to put a certain workload. So the world is becoming complex because there is more interconnection between people and more link between different microservices and solutions that actually people are giving to each other. Yeah.
David, any perspective from your end?
Yeah, I mean, to add to what Christophe's already said, I think the big drivers from our point of view is data gravity, regulatory fragmentation, and then distributed workloads. So data gravity is when the sheer volume of data that is being created by things like industrial IoT, by logging production lines, media and broadcast, it creates such a vast mass of data that it's really impractical to move. So what you need to do is you need to build obviously your storage where it's being created, but then your compute, your applications and controls round about where it's being created. Then you've got the problem of regulation. You've got regulations about privacy, about data sovereignty. So again, there's another barrier about where you're going to move it and where you can control it. So if you've got, let's think about that. You've got physics and economics on data gravity, and you've got the law making you keep data in certain places. Those things combined force you to have distributed workloads. And once you've got distributed workloads, that's your third level of complexity. So instead of you just managing one whole infrastructure, you've got to manage multiple infrastructures, multiple storage and compute installations around the world where they're compliant with the regulation, where they're near to where the data is being created. And that's a whole new level of complexity. How you then manage that? Well, that's why we're here. So you can't go back. You can't go back to the old consolidated single instance. So the only way forward is to build a more modular approach, which is what we have with Digital Realty Service Fabric. You can have all of your different global instances connected through Service Fabric. It's on demand. You can move it up and down as required. It's composable, integrated with all of your other services. And what we found is if you combine that with something like HPE, Aruba Networking Central, you can balance the day-by-day, minute-by-minute, real-time requirements to balance cost, latency, performance, and regulation, all in one single package.
Just to perhaps expand on that as well, historically, it's always been a bit of an either or. It's been a bit of a choice around the technology and the solutions. You're either in the cloud or you're on premise. And, then we've gone through the cloud first strategy era where it's multi-cloud, hybrid cloud. Now, obviously, with the explosion in data, the regulatory requirements and the complexities that Christoph and David have spoken about, it's not an either or scenario anymore. It's about how do you select the right components of all of those things across private, public, on-premise and, co-location services and bring those together. And, I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit more, but how do you interconnect that seamlessly? Whereas it has been traditionally very complex to bring those elements together. And that's really, I guess, where we're starting to solve for those with things like Service Fabric and software-defined networks and how you bring that automation and orchestration together.
Yeah, I think we touched upon complexity. You spoke about data distributed workloads, and you talked about the regulatory aspect as well. Now, many companies are looking at deploying AI workloads. Yeah, and when you talk about AI workloads, the first thing which comes across for all the reasons and the discussion point we have had is security. So from a security perspective, how you think this partnership is addressing the digital realty as well as HP partnership?
Look, security has always been top of mind, in certain parts of the different organizations at different levels. But, we've seen recently in your example that you brought at the start, cybersecurity has been, one of the top priorities of, the C-level and board members for a number of years now. And it's only getting more complex as we've said. Data is everywhere today. So it's not within those traditional perimeters and boundaries that we're used to. It's either, it's not in a branch office, it's not in a data center location. We're opening up our data to our partner ecosystem, our consumers, what we're also doing for ourselves. So that security posture and the attack vectors that are available today is something that is only becoming larger as that data gets distributed, as we have to keep it in locations for data sovereignty and data gravity reasons. But it's not a product solution. It's what our customers are doing around their overall risk posture. So it's things like what are we doing around governance, and what are we doing around the solutions that support the policies and how we're managing those AI workloads and those use cases. And we did a roundtable with some of the leaders of from the FSI industry here across Singapore, and the top themes were around how do they maintain privacy, and are their governance and internal policies relevant for the environments and AI workloads that they're building today? So it's about how do we manage those jurisdictions to be able to deliver the right outcomes to the customers.
Great. So I think we'll take the security conversation a little forward, David, and I'll bring you in. That the infrastructure is scaling.
Yes.
And as we discussed, the complexity is also increasing. So in a scenario like this, where the infrastructure complexity, both these aspects are scaling, how do organizations still plan a resilient architecture?
Well, resilience isn't a single decision. It's multi-layered, and it's the outcome of many different decisions. So you've got redundant physical security, multiple entry power points, multiple generations, redundancy in terms of your UPSs and so on, generators, cooling systems. But I think the key thing is that customers have to take a very clear-eyed view about the cost of outages. Instead of adding up as looking at it as a cost of redundancy, it's a cost of failure. And even when you have the most highly protected single site, it is still a single site. You get freak weather events, you get geopolitical events landing right in the middle of your data hall in a ballistic fashion, which can really upset anything. And there's no data center can protect against that. So if you've got a very clear-eyed view about what the cost of an outage is, then you can then start planning out where the workloads are going to be distributed, how you connect them, how you run them in real time, and have a really balanced approach to resilience, risk, and cost.
Any perspective?
No, I mean, it's true that today we have this, as we discussed just before, this complexity is increasing, and I think we are now moving into an hybrid cloud business resiliency. It's no more just preventing an outage, which is punctual here and there. I think the element also of major event is also getting different than maybe a couple of years ago. A major disaster. And we have seen a lot of things happening into the recent past, not only on the geopolitics, but even in Asia, we have seen a lot of very large natural disaster who actually came into the region. And that, I think, changed also the perception of what is business continuity. We forgot what it was. And I think the technology and the people and the process that we have to put in place today need to adapt to this new reality that we have in front of us. Yeah, and every day we are learning more about this new reality. On our hand, we of course have, in addition of partnering with digital reality, we have also our own IP to prevent the leakage of the data. To make sure that there is redundancy into the design of our system for the customer that we are serving, that we have a set of services also who are smart enough and with the right level of automation, because also the time to react is getting very, very short. For multiple reasons, is getting short because we have a technology which is accelerating the workload. Yeah, we see in the past, you have a workload which is into a server, which is dedicated to that, 3-tier architecture, Now with containerization, things are moving around very quickly. So again, the monitoring element, the observability is changing because things are much more dynamic than before, right? So of course, to address that dynamics, you need to be fast. Yeah. Same thing, we are talking about AI. AI, and in general, IT is having a set of systems who are getting higher in density. That means the time to respond to an elevation of temperature compared to a system which is at 2 or 3 kilowatt. Now the systems are getting 20, 30, 100 kilowatt per rack. If there is a cooling issue there, you need to react very quickly there also, right? So we have all sorts of technology, again, to observe what is happening into this entire end-to-end ecosystem, which is also very important. It's no more just a question of facility versus IT. It is an hybrid environment. I need to also know what is happening into my public cloud, because that can be a threat. Yeah. So this kind of 360 view is also a new thing that the business continuity planner need to change, because they have also entered into this hybrid cloud domain, right? The same thing of data protection. Now we are talking about immutable system and data. We are talking about air gap system, and that is becoming more and more frequent. And that is coming even systematically when you keep things on premise. Yeah. So when you have things who are into public cloud, you take that as a services. But when you put that on premise, you need to also make sure that this environment is very well protected. So the level of services and solution that we bring also for this environment is adjusting because the demand is also bringing a different level of business continuity demand from the business and from the different customer or colleagues or partner that we have into this journey. Right?
And by its very nature, AI is about putting that data at people's fingertips. Mm-hmm. So it is about actually, what used to be quite well controlled. If you wanted a report, you went to a team and you asked them for a report. We're now actually giving that to everybody and access to everyone, both internally and externally within our organization. So that posture has changed. But what it also means in terms of continuity is the integrity of that data, right? People need to trust that the answers that they're being given are valid. And, you can see in the models, if you've got drift in that, or if you've got poor latency or those types of things, and those models can very quickly become out of sync and they're not providing the right information as well. And that can be just as dangerous as, a disaster from a technology perspective or a natural disaster point of view. If the data's not accurate and you don't have that hygiene and you don't have the governance and the model around making sure that what people are using is actually valid information, then that's just as dangerous to an organization as not having the data at all.
Yeah. Simon, you talked about latency and continuity, and Christoph, you touched upon the business continuity in the context of a couple of workloads. Yeah, data protection was one of them. AI workload was one of them. And I like your concept of the cost of failure. I think that was very key. One thing which is common, which needs to be addressed to basically address these 3 or 4 areas, is network transformation. So maybe I'll come to you in terms of network transformation. How should a customer look at it in the context of, say, AI inferencing?
Yeah. So it's a really important point, and we've been talking about it for a while now, and it's really relevant to both Digital Realty and HPE in the fact that, again, historically, I think I look at it in terms of a pyramid. Traditionally, the infrastructure and the data center was kind of at the bottom of the pyramid, and the value from a business perspective was, at the applications and at the data level. And strategically, decisions and strategies were being designed around the applications and what they were providing and how they were delivering business value. And then the decisions around infrastructure, network, etc., are being made, later on in the picture. The table has really turned, and that pyramid has flipped, where you've got to have those strategic decisions around where is your data located, how are you connecting to that data, distributed and decentralized, and most organizations are multi-geographies, at least multi-sites. So how are you connecting your users to those environments? How are you connecting that to your private and your public cloud? How are you connecting that to your on-premise infrastructure is now a strategic decision, because it wasn't that long ago we were all getting pretty excited about 1 gig links. We're now talking regularly around that 100 gig is the norm. With AI, we're seeing, in some parts of the world, and certainly, for Digital Realty in the US, we've got partnerships with our carrier partners where we've got 400 gig links between our data centers, and AI is driving that. When you think about both the network transformation within the data center, and we launched, a lab the other day, and it was really around, some of the network infrastructure now. A port has the ability to transfer 1.6 terabytes of data in a single port. East-west traffic, GPUs are consuming up to 800 gigabits per second. That is something that we didn't even dream of. So your networks need to be able to handle both how your applications are working east-west within the data center, but then how are you getting that data accessible both in your edge and distributed sites, but then also how are your consumers doing that in real time? And again, going back to that predictability and integrity of the data, you have to be thinking about your network up front and how your data flows, and not about what's the applications in a siloed manner, but how are people accessing that and from where?
You'd like to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, look, throughput is critically important, control and reliability. I think the bit that's really interesting to me is as we go into going from AI training and factories into delivering inference for customers, is the emerging importance of latency for that and jitter. So it's average latency, everybody understands you've got to try and manage that down. What we're finding with AI delivery and inference is the importance of the long tail. So if you have 99 packets being delivered under 10 milliseconds, but one packet is actually 200 milliseconds, that can have a cascading effect on your model and your GPU usage. So you might have $500,000 of GPUs sitting there, and half of them are stalled because it's waiting on one packet because of that long tail delay. So it's a real learning curve for CIOs and engineers to start managing their networks in a different fashion for a different use case. And this is where Simon was talking about intra data center networking, the east-west side, is we're taking these distributed workloads, as we mentioned earlier, and we're moving them around the world. You got to balance the throughput, the controls, that jitter minimization for distributing your AI queries. We can think about industrial and automotive visual use cases where latency is critical, as well as the wasted GPU capacity. You've also got performance degradation to the point it becomes useless. If you think about the pain to adoption that's going to happen, if people don't trust the results of their AI system, they'll switch it off. Adoption goes to zero, and all your investment is completely lost.
Great. You touched upon throughput and control. So now this brings me to Service Fabric and GreenLake. So how these two can help customers who are basically looking for network transformation?
Yeah, so from I guess to expand on Service Fabric, so from our point of view, that's a critical part of what we call our platform digital. And it's about how we interconnect, our data centers, both, let's say, here in Singapore, as an example, we've got 3 data centers. We've got what we call our Metro Connect product. So, we can seamlessly connect over a fiber connectivity through a self-service portal. If you've got workloads for redundancy purposes or geographically dispersed or for whatever reason that might be, we can connect that seamlessly within a metropolitan location. But as I mentioned before, most of our customers, have particularly in this region, are multi-geography. So, we're spanning the ocean. So how do we then, work from a carrier neutral perspective where we've got, most of the large global carriers where they've got points of presence in our data centers, and putting a software-defined platform across the top of that. So our customers connect Singapore to Hong Kong, to Australia, to the US, to EMEA, all through a simple interface where it removes the complexity of the networking, but it's done in a on-demand style. You can ramp up the bandwidth as you need, whether it's for a project or whether it's for particular times of the month where you need to do different types of processing for financial reasons, etc. So it's about how do you do that in a seamless fashion, in a pay-as-you-go model. Now then, how does that tie into, GreenLake? Obviously, being that ability to be able to tie that into the infrastructure, being able to bundle, your network with your infrastructure, and being able to present that out to, the customers in a single GreenLake financial model that allows them to, do that again by consumption OpEx model as opposed to a CapEx heavy model is really where we're seeing the synergies together. And I'm sure Christoph has a point of view around that as well.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, when we go to inferencing, Yeah, it is really a edge to cloud story, right? I mean, we cannot do inferencing into a centralized environment. It is distributed by default. So, of course, having a very agile and versatile network offering is going to be strategically critical to customer and to people who want to go into this inferencing, right? The second thing is we go back to location. You also need to be distributed, and so for us to have partners who have multiple points of presence, but with a very tight and efficient way of interconnection, it is critical because we can bring the value of a services basically anywhere. Yeah, and you can serve all these different clients who are also getting more and more distributed, not even because they are distributed within the geography of Asia Pacific, but you take into, most of the customer that we see in Singapore today, for example, which is not a big city, right? It's not a very large country like maybe in Australia, but the problem start to become similar. Yeah, they need to have redundancy because it's not asynchronous, let's say, replication. They want to have synchronous system because the system are so critical. As I mentioned, the criticality is getting higher. That means the system to prevent any form of discontinuity, right, is becoming more and more important to address, right? So this is why people are going into synchronous operation, right? So for that, they need to have at least 2 data centers, and these 2 data centers need to be very close to each other in terms of replication, right? The second thing, they have more than 2. Because it's not enough. If you have a manufacturing plant somewhere into Tuas, you may not want to have, in the east of Singapore, you may not want to have a data center on the west only, right? You need to have also more than 1 or 2, right? Mm-hmm. So this is becoming also a next level of complexity that we need to address, and partnership is important into that. Observability of the network is also critical. Because there is so many things going on, as you mentioned just before. You cannot have a doubt. Okay, a doubt is going to be an issue also because the end user will say, "Hey, I don't want to go on this platform because we are not selling just a bunch of hardware. We are selling a platform ultimately, right?" So for that platform, we need to make sure that this platform is continuous in terms of the service that this is providing, right? So the network is part of the service. The agility of the network is very important. Of course, we need to have in certain position huge bandwidth and very low latency. But for certain workload, we also need to have basically the right mix of latency. You don't need to be extreme for everything. Because if you are extreme for everything, commercially, it is a nonsense. So that agility that we have into the way of designing our data center, we need to have that agility also in the way we deploy the edge to cloud. Yeah? And network is one of these elements of agility that we need to have, one of these elements of modularity that we need to have. And because we have this modularity, because we have this extreme distribution, monitoring and intelligence are going to become more and more critical. So this is continuously the same message, is we need to pull all this stuff together, because if you miss one of the elements, the solution, no matter if it's an AI or a normal IT workload, is basically going to fail into the next generation of outcome that we need to give. Yeah.
So you touched upon edge to cloud. So that brings me to the cloud rebalancing. So for customers, what should be the framework that they should look at for cloud rebalancing, and what does this partnership offer to the customers who are looking for cloud rebalancing?
Cloud rebalancing, in a lot of ways, when we think about it, it's the acknowledgement that a lot of the early cloud promise was a bit oversold. It oversold on savings, for one thing. Flexibility is real, but also came with some surprise egress bills and surprise latency challenges. So the rebalancing is partly to address that. And the framework we think of as having is 3 steps. So first of all, it's considering where does that workload belong? And it's not everything. If your workload is bursty, unpredictable, seasonal, absolutely, it probably belongs in the cloud, and it gives you that infinite elasticity that has a tremendous value for organizations. But if it's steady state, if it's regulatory sensitive, if it's latency sensitive, and there's very, very high volumes of storage and compute, you probably want to think about keeping it on-prem in a colocation data center. So the next thing we need to understand is the data that's being created. Where does it live? How does it move? And how much does that cost? So egress costs, data gravity, these are the new challenges that companies have to get their head around to understand. And prioritizing that determines where your workload is going to sit. And you have to really consider if you're going to create new latency challenges by moving it into the cloud. So, and the last step is, can you get the data to where the users are? Because it's only when the users consume the data that you're actually going to create the value. Hybrid and multi-cloud really only work effectively if the networking is reliable, it's flexible, and it's high performance. So the data needs to be consumable for that value to be created.
Just have any perspective?
Well, I think hybrid bring the point that the end user, they don't care about where things are going to be. What they care is the experience need to be uniform no matter where the IT is actually locating things. Yeah. And for that, I think, again, if we go into this partnership, it's not because we put certain things on premise that we are forgetting the cloud. So to have this kind of very close, I would say, location between enterprise workload that I put into my co-location data center, which is not too far away from a cloud data center because they are, I would say, virtually close to each other. Right? In certain cases, they are to the next door, physically into some of this environment that digital reality is actually operating. Right. So that is the first thing. The second thing outside of the experience is cost predictability. Yeah. So that is also something that we as a GreenLake are trying to bring to the customer, right? Because today, yes, there is a lot of change. And because there is a lot of change, you need to have a lot of predictability also, right? Because you need to make sure that you can predict your next step, yeah? Because you will have to change, yeah? So that is also something that we are, of course, proposing in addition of the data control and so on that we have been talking a lot. But I think the commercial stability and consistency, as well as the element of predictability of the financial and the experience for the end user are really the two elements that, in my view, are really the most critical for the hybrid cloud or the H2 cloud operation. Yeah.
I think the conversation that we have had, there definitely seems to be a need for customers to look at their infrastructure strategy. So are you seeing from a digital realty perspective sentiments of customers relooking at their infrastructure strategy? Do they really feel the need to modernize? And in your experience, are you really looking at customers designing, planning to implement a new strategy?
Absolutely. I mean, look, what's driving this is the AI imperative. If you're a CIO and you don't have an AI strategy, you've got a very short shelf life. Your CEO probably has that from his chairman and his board as well, if not the shareholders. So the AI imperative is forcing technology leaders to come up with that strategy. And it's forcing them to confront some really uncomfortable past legacy decisions. A lot of technical debt's been incurred, and businesses have accumulated vast amounts of data in their organization, across fragmented systems, different jurisdictions. And it was always valuable in the abstract, but there was never the business case. It was valuable in theory, but the business case never stood up to actually create a system to transform it. And AI changes that. AI allows the extraction of new value from all of that legacy data, but it means that they need to restructure how that data is collected and managed. It's going to create new revenues from new products, and it's going to reduce costs. But also, as we get to the point, it also creates new infrastructure challenges. It's going to create infrastructure challenges on power. It's on the density, cooling, networking, and data storage. And the requirements that they've got, these are far more than any traditional co-location center or enterprise data center was ever designed for. So a lot of our customers have got this in hand. Some of them are failing in one of two ways. So one group's in paralysis. They see the opportunity, but they just can't make the business case fly when the returns are so uncertain right now. So the other group sees modernization as just another hardware refresh cycle instead of an architectural overhaul. And that group really risks locking in constraints just at the time where flexibility is most important, because nobody, no matter what they say, no matter the level of expertise, knows how AI is going to pan out. Nobody knows what workloads are going to take off, which ones are going to die 6 months down the line. So from our point of view, it's about maximizing your flexibility. It's about having, the composable elements between HP and digital realty, where you can move your workloads around and just, prioritize flexibility. I mentioned earlier on, consider the cost of failure. This is very much in that line. If you don't have a flexible infrastructure, then you're not going to be able to adapt when the world changes round about you.
And this is where the discussion around hybrid IT architecture really sort of takes hold. Is, like I said earlier, it's not an either or scenario. And we spoke, and Christoph mentioned, we're seeing power density requirements for the new AI infrastructure, going from probably in practicalities now probably running at sort of 20 to 50 kilowatts as opposed to 5 to 10. We're seeing it already in up to 150 kilowatts. The next generation's going to be 400 kilowatts, and it's a whole snowball effect. More power means more heat. More heat means improved and innovative cooling solutions. That coupled with the data explosion means that you need to make sure that your network capabilities and your storage is up to speed as well. So it's about how do you bring all of those together in a flexible manner that David's been talking about. But it doesn't mean that everything needs to be in that location. Again, it's not an either or. It's about how do you map out that return on investment from what can you do in cloud AI? How does that then progress to a co-location with high density compute and fully connected? But how do you bring those elements together to have the right solutions, the right applications in the right locations? Because it's not a one size fits all. And I think people need to be really clear that you don't have to jump in with a massive CapEx investment up front. You can stage it, but you need to plan and you need to have a strategy around how you're going to implement that.
No, I think I want to add into this, because I think one of the elements that we can start to see at the moment is, first, this AI workload are also bringing an element of speed of deployment. Because there is a lot of complexity, and people, first of all, don't have the experience of that complexity because it's new. It's not HPC. HPC is something else. Because when we are talking about inferencing, it's not something that you do by batch. It's continuous. So where I'm going into speed, it's customer also will not have the time to think too long, because the time they will think, the technology will have changed already. We can see that the AI is changing very quickly, and the time you have the thinking about what you need to do, then there is a new technology which is going to change again your plan, right? So how do we address that from an HPE point of view, right? We have this private cloud for AI. So yes, I agree with you. We don't have the one size fit all, which is true. But actually, again, when it comes to inferencing, we start to realize also that it's pretty standard, actually, because people are using a very similar set of, I would say, technologies that they put on top of this infrastructure, right? So the infrastructure is starting to become more and more a commodity also for AI. It's just that this commodity life cycle is getting very short. And we can see that the H100 have been very quickly wiped out by the 200 and so on. Right? So we can see that this technology is going very fast. So we have this private cloud for AI solution, which is something that customer can deploy very easily, and especially if they find a data center which is already available. Because also the kind of retrofitting story that you were able to do in the past for some IT equipment at 2 or 3 kilowatt per rack. I mean, yes, it was feasible. But we are talking about things who are, about 20 kilowatt per racks. Each of the racks are about 2 tons. So, I mean, the dimensions are becoming more complex also to handle. So you need to have speed to don't think too long because you need to go to your outcome very quickly. You need to have speed to find a location to put that, connect quickly to your business, which is something that we are doing with digital reality. And you need to have also, I would say, a speed into the way you can finance that. And this is why we are posting that also as a service, where people don't have to put a huge investment as a first step, right? They can go on a monthly payment on something which is going to bring the outcome also on a monthly basis, right? So because they also sell that as a service usually, right? So we are bringing this solution which is addressing that element of time and speed that the business need to have when it comes to AI. When you have an idea now, you need to implement that very quickly. Otherwise, you will probably be gone into the market. At the time, actually, your competitor will come with a slightly similar idea, but they will just be a little bit of one generation ahead of you, right? So that speed is something that we are trying to also give as an outcome to our customer.
Great. So as part of our concluding session for our conversation now, if we have to give, say, one advice to the CIOs and the IT leaders listening to this podcast, and they are planning their IT modernization, what would that advice be?
In a single sentence, it would be architect your applications for compute, power, location, and interconnect all at the same time, not as an afterthought, because then you'll get into trouble.
For me, I would say go as a service, and embrace things who are standard and easy to deploy.
Yeah, look, from my perspective, it's about thinking about the ecosystem. You know, not everybody can solve your problems. So you need to have a great partnership model. You need to be working with infrastructure, data center, network providers, and being able to bring that ecosystem together and do that in a seamless, integrated fashion.
Thank you, David, Christophe, and Simon, for an insightful and an engaging conversation. And to our audience, if I would like to summarize the conversation in three key takeaways, it would be: 1, modernizing the IT core is now a business imperative. Legacy infrastructure is the biggest barrier to agility, AI adoption, and cyber resilience. Security is no longer an add-on. It must be architected into data, infrastructure, and operation. 2, hybrid cloud plus co-location is the new operating model. The future is not all public cloud, it's intentional cloud, rebalancing across on-prem, co-location, and cloud. 3rd, private cloud AI will define next-gen competitive advantage. Enterprises need to secure, govern AI environments, which requires modern infrastructure and ecosystem partnership. Thank you for listening, and bye for now.